So with that said, I'd like to introduce Ken Workman from the Duwamish tribe, and he will talk about this place and welcome you all here. So please, a warm welcome for Ken Workman.
In our native language, the language is Lashutsi. This language was taken away from us for so very long, is now beginning to come back. And so we have language instructors in the regional tribes. And so it is my honor to stand in front of you here today and speak in a way that we couldn't as Native people for so very long. And so by way of formal introduction, Yayus means work, and Stokes means man. Yayus Stokes teach da hata Duwamish. I am Workman of the Duwamish tribe. Agui, wagui, siab, siab, cha. And great grandson of Chief Seattle, I am. And so our language is verb-based. So it sounds very much like Yoda. And so when we're speaking in our modern way, and we're in our language classes, we have to train our brains to go the other way. And so that's what you just now heard, was when I said Aqua Yekwa, which means great, Aqua Yekwa, great grandson, Siab Sial, Chief Sial, Teats Da, is me. So this is once again our way of talking, and it's my pleasure to stand in front of you and do that. I am a council member of the Duwamish tribe. I'm a former president of our nonprofit arm. And so anybody that's been an officer in a nonprofit, well, you know what the things are. And so I just go, oh, thank you, I can retire now. And so also I'm a former Boeing employee where I was employed in the Flight Ops Engineering Department as a systems and data analyst. And so I bring my engineering brain to the fore when I'm talking in our native language. And the only place I've been able to learn this language from instructors is at the University of Washington who think like me. I can't go to a regular language class where young people are being taught, where they say this is a dog and this is a cat and that's a river. Repeat after me, dog, cat, river. So we got the flower and I got upset because when they said, what's the name of that? So it's a kind of a Zalas flower. I went, you can't describe a flower like that. A flower's got to have an adjective, like a Zalas. Beautiful flower. In our language, uses, they stretch out words, and the word means it's bigger. Reduplication means it's bigger. It's a vowel, it's just two characters, it means it's smaller. Or the three characters, it means it's bigger. And so when I go, Weoya Yusate, what I just said is, I don't work in that big house anymore. So this is what our language sounds like. And we as Duwamish are still here. And so it was an honor when Paul asked me to stand up here and say a few words today. And when we're talking about land acknowledgement, and people ask me here in Seattle, oh, we need to contact the Duwamish, and the Duwamish can send somebody out for land acknowledgement. I go, well, this is kind of hard for us because this is our land. And so it'd be like me walking over the door when you knock on the door and I open up and I say, I acknowledge that I'm in my own house. So we use a welcome. But when we're in Yakima country, we acknowledge we're in Yakima country. And so when we talk about land, we're talking about the dirt itself. And we, as Native people, realize, and have always realized, that when we pass away, that our bodies decay, all that carbon-based material decays and it goes back down into the ground. And this is where my science side kicks in. That there's a relationship between the mycorrhizal fungi and the root systems of the trees and the berries that break down the carbon-based material that was grandma and grandpa and all of that. And we end up back in the trees. So we end up in the berries and the grass and everything else, which means when the deer eats the grass and we eat the deer, we're still consuming nature. So it's this continuous cycle. But because this place is so new, Seattle is only 172 years old. And that means from the time that my grandfather stood on the shores of Alki Beach, Chief Seattle did, and he said, "La Lil," which means come ashore. "La Lil de Siaya," my friends, Adisha Padatea Loktos, onto this ancient land of the Duwamish people. Gui de Siaya Adisha Pat. You are welcome here on this land. So that's what he did, and that changed everything for us. The world flipped upside down. And so at that point, we had been living in this environment since the Ice Age. So now we used to talk about 10,000 years. Now we're talking about 14,000 years. And that's how long we've been here. So when he said those words, it only took 3 years. Well, it was 3 years, 2 months, and 9 days. From the time he welcomed people onto this land to the time those very same people said, "Get out of Dodge. You're not welcome here. This is our land." So we as Native people don't know how to survive other than hunting and gathering. And so we struggled. We struggled immensely. Society was changing. These new, more powerful people were coming in. And so we have been in that struggle all along, and we continue that. And we buried ourselves. As Native people, we hid as much as you can from society because we were nothing more than dogs. And so when somebody married us, a white person would marry us, that white person was ostracized from society. Oh, how could you marry a dog? And then, of course, we were killed. You're not people when you're shooting an Indian. You're shooting a dog. And so this is the environment that we have survived in. And now we're beginning to watch society change. And we appreciate that. The people that you see here are the ones that have survived. And so when Paul says, can you come down here and do a land acknowledgement? I say, sure. Because my aunts and uncles are in these trees. And we know that through modern science. And I'm happy to stand on this stage before you in this old house. If you look at the cedars out there, this house must have been built around 1900. That means the cedars wood that's on these planks is much older than that. And those planks came from here, which means my people are in that wood. So my people are with me, and they're here to say to you, welcome, my friends, onto this ancient land of the Duwamish. Thank you.
Of Cascadia, the practice of the self, is our first panel. How to be here now. A man who's studied this question for a very long time is the man who moderates, I think, all of our panels at these events. He's my brother. He's the chief editor, one of 3 chief editors of Watershed Press, former board member of the Cascadia Poetics Lab. He's the chair of philosophy at Seattle University. And he has just undergone the most serious surgery of his life on his left ankle, and is just in the last few days able to put weight on his left foot. And yet he takes his crutches, comes here today, and he helps present and moderate this panel. Will you please give a warm welcome to Tetsu's and Jason Wirth.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm very happy to be here. It wasn't always obvious after a while that I'd ever leave my house again, but here I am. So I'm so happy, and boy, we have 2 outstanding panels. They'll go about 70, 75 minutes each. The practice is going to be, each person will come up, I'll introduce them, they'll give their spiel, and then it's going to be a beautiful, beautiful feast of dialogue afterwards, among ourselves, questions from the audience, etc., etc. And I'll try to keep things just moving along at a fair pace so everyone gets enough time to share their ideas. And one of the things that is a result of the very sorrowful and shameful story that was just told is that we imagine that we are on the land as individuals. Not we are the land, we are the trees, we are our sustaining conditions. No, we're on the land. It's something we can own, we can buy and sell. And that's not ending well. I would say, case A, possible self-extinction as our species, as we proudly buy and trade ourselves, we're doing. And so we have amazing people to help us enter this complex of ideas and its philosophical and poetic registers. I'm so excited. And so we'll go in order. I'll just let you know who's coming up, by the way, and then I'll introduce them all individually as they come up. It'll be Roberto Harrison, Alicia Hokanson, Brandon Letsinger, and then the unforgettable Robert Michael Pyle.
Lorin Medley's on the stage?
And Lorin Medley, yes, and Lorin Medley, I'm sorry, pardon me, yes she is, I see my notes right here. So Lorin Medley will speak after Brandon and before Bob Pyle. So our first speaker, Roberto Harrison, you heard him last night, Pan-American American poet, living in Milwaukee since 1991, hot book from City Lights Press, back there for your enjoyment. And he was Milwaukee Poet Laureate 2017-2019. Roberto.
Thank you for having me. Can I sit down?
Yes.
Yes, go on, please.
Yeah, so I live in Milwaukee, and I'm from Panama. And in some ways, I think all my work is about Panama in some ways. And I have a lot of experience with math and computer science, or that's what I studied as an undergrad. Went to grad school for math.
Could you use the mic, please?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, so I went to grad school for math, and then there I was transformed by Henry Miller and the Beats and a bunch of people like that. And I took a year off and traveled in an old way with hardly any money, and I had a lot of adventures. Got to the mountains in Morocco, which is like ruined now by Americans, I think. But it was ancient and really beautiful. And then on returning, I tried to continue in math and begin writing. And so I've been writing basically ever since. Somehow I've written almost every day of my life since then. I'm 63 years old now. And, I could never do it in any kind of academic way. I tried. I flirted with it a lot. I almost went to grad school for it, for modern studies or something at one point. But, I was just lucky enough to move to Milwaukee, where we just happened to move half a block away from Woodland Pattern, which is one of the best poetry centers in the world, where Matt has also been. And you guys should all check it out. It's amazing. But yeah, so I have like 9 books and a recent 10th sort of chapbook. And so, I'm close to a lot of writers. I like Cesar Vallejo, Jose Zamolina, Clarice Lispector, I like Pessoa. Americans, I like Jackson McLowe and Linda Janian and Clark Coolidge, people like that. So when I dropped out of school in math, I had to teach myself because I couldn't get into school. So I ended up reading most of the poetry collection at the library at IU in Bloomington, which was a really good collection because it was put together by this poet, Barry Alpert, who had a magazine called Wirth, which published like Tom Gray, Wirth, and all these people. And so I found there were some great used bookstores in Bloomington. And so I read most of the poetry collection in the library, and Yusuf Komunyaku was just there. He had just published his first book, and I became friends with Yusuf. And through him, I met Etheridge Knight. And Etheridge was really important to me because he became a poet in prison, and I had to figure out how to be a poet without any kind of academic background. I didn't think I had a right to be a writer because it's not my first language. I didn't start speaking English until when we moved here when I was 7. And, so I studied math and computer science as an undergrad, but, I had to figure out there was something that was really big and abstract that I couldn't figure out in these other ways, conventional ways. I had no idea I could go to poetry and all these other things until much later. But so I met Yusuf, and he turned me on to like Hart Crane and the Harlem Renaissance, Mary Bearden, people like that, Bob Kaufman, and some other young poets in town. There's a guy named Kenneth May who's still doing stuff, I think, in South Korea. But then, I moved on to Milwaukee, and then like the first thing I did in Milwaukee in like 1991 was I went to a Pauline Rose concert, a Woodland Pattern. And so all these people that I was reading in Bloomington beforehand, I found already a Woodland Pattern all of a sudden, and just completely freely available. I'd have almost one-to-one access with all these world-class writers. We saw Kathy Acker, and there's like 4 people in the audience. We all went to a bar afterwards, and we had dinner. And and so like I'm in Milwaukee, and I feel close to like people like Will Alexander. I really enjoy talking to him. He's like, I've had a lot of psychotic phases. I've had 12 major psychotic phases, and in a way they're like a lodestone for my work. And they're sort of, I would say they're spiritual experiences that I don't recognize any religion, Christianity or Buddhism or Native anything. I don't know what it is. The earth is speaking to me through the universes, and the universes are speaking to me through the earth. And I get overwhelmed by meaning. And I can't process it all, so, and it's the most beautiful and the most terrifying experiences of my life, and, I'm glad to be far away from that, because that stuff can be, it's powerful and it's beautiful, but I can't live there. So I try to get at that in certain ways in my writing, that's where it really helps to have sort of an expansive view of the world like Will Alexander does. He thinks in terms of eons and, the cosmos and, So it's not one thing that I do all kinds of things. My books are all different. And probably the most influential art form in my life is the Kuna Mola. The Kuna people are important people in Panama. A lot of the world knows about Panama, mostly through them. We are staying in a house where they have a mola, which it's amazing. It's just profound. I've never seen one like that. And so, I learned a lot from those molas because they were always on the walls. And so I learned, negative capability, hybridity, abstraction, everything that you could apply to visual arts was there. And a lot of it had text. And so I grew up with these. I'm still surrounded by them at home. We have a beautiful home together, me and Brenda, with lots of molas on the wall. So my drawing practice is also part of my life. I drew almost all the time when I was a young child, but I had no idea what it meant to be an artist until much later. And so, I wish I could show some of my drawings, but I can't. But I work at a place called the Indian Community School in Milwaukee, and there's 4 Indian languages taught there: Ho-Chunk, Ojibwe, Menominee, and Oneida. And it's a really, really beautiful facility. It's profound. I took Will Alexander there. He got a tour, and he was really moved. He really wants to read there. And my boss, Mr. Dropic at the time, gave him a welcome packet, and one of the items was a plastic bracelet with the 7 sacred gifts of the Ojibwe, which is why the institution is a faith-based institution. So, in these horrifying times, I take a lot of refuge in that community, even though just a very small part of it. I work about 15 hours a week with the kids, and I start off my day with 3rd graders, hanging out in their classrooms. And I take the 4th graders to lunch, and I take them out to recess, and I hang out with the 7th graders for lunch. I take them out to recess, and I hang out with them, and the 8th graders out to recess. And it's like transformative and beautiful. I have learned so much from these kids. I never intended to work with kids in my life, but they asked me to because I was working at the front desk. I was really moved, and so I did, and at first it was horrifying. I had no idea how to deal with children. Wow. I have been contorted so many ways, And so gradually I kind of unfolded, I think, with them. And they've helped me so much, I can't put it into words. I don't know how to describe it. It's not like an intellectual transformation, but it's something really beautiful that I feel really lucky to be a part of. So.
Okay, well, wonderful, wonderful. Our next guest is Alicia Hokanson, Seattle native, someone who has devoted her life to the beaches, forests, and islands of the Salish Sea area, with a deep attention to the natural world, to our home, to ourselves. I think of Alicia, I also think of another one of the prizes in this part of the world, Brooding Heron Press. She was instrumental in getting Sam and Sally Green on the island of Waldron, where the press was founded off the grid, still largely run off the grid. And she has 2 books with them, including one of the very earliest ones. She's earned her BA and MA in English at the University of Washington, and has been in various forms and various places. An English teacher, Australia, Waldron Island, where you get to teach, there's so few children there, so you get to teach 1st to 8th grade in the same place. And then 27 years at Lakeside School in Seattle. All of our books are wonderful. Her latest book is back there, Perishable World. Please avail yourselves. Alicia, welcome.
Paul sent me this kind of cryptic list of questions. What does it mean to be in Cascadia? What is your practice of Cascadia? And so I had to think, well, what is my practice? Basically, my practice is the community of island life. I spend half a year on Lorin, which, as Jason mentioned, is a San Juan Island. It's not served by the ferry. You have to get there by the mail boat or by your own boat or friends, or you can fly in. But because it's remote and it has no utilities, it has no cables, electricity, people heat with wood, you get a propane truck delivery a couple times a year, and most people now have solar panels for generating their own power. So you have to be very self-sufficient there. But because it is remote and beautiful, the people who live there have worked very, very hard to keep it that way, to keep it undeveloped, except for farms and like some forestry, not very much, because it's unique. It's the other islands, have been kind of exploded by tourism, and the prices have gone up. It's almost unaffordable. In fact, I think San Juan County is one of the most expensive counties in the United States to live. So I first came to Waldron in 1978 when I was hired to teach at the one-room school, and I lived there for 7 years. I was born in Seattle. I was a city girl, but I had done some traveling. But this idea of moving to a small island and teaching in a small school was just such an exotic proposal. I was totally unprepared to be the teacher for all the kids, 1 through 8. I thought I did it, but I kind of had to scam my way in by telling them, oh yeah, I can do this. I've taught high school, I've taught middle school. I hadn't taught, little kids. But anyway, luckily, because of the generosity of the community and some of the people that helped me as aides, I think I had a pretty successful tenure there. And I just fell in love with the idea of this small community that is taking care of itself and taking care of the island, working really hard politically to make sure that things don't change too fast, interacting with the San Juan County commissioners when they make rulings about things, and working with the comprehensive plan, which is something Washington State has. Every county has to have a comprehensive plan. And Waldron they made the county label it rural and undevelopable in terms of industry or any kind of business that would bring people in to make the business go. You can have a business like farming and sell your products off island, but you can't bring people in to help, make the industry, whatever it is, go. So it's kind of unique that way that, in a way it's a kind of a 19th century life that is being preserved there. When I first moved there, everybody heated with wood and lit their house with kerosene lamps. It was just the beginning of solar power. So we really moved from the 19th century technology and skipped the 20th century because suddenly solar powers and cell phones came in. And so it was kind of an interesting kind of historical moment. be that bridge between technologies. So I guess the reason that I say my practice of Cascadia is islands and communities is that this moment in time when we are under assault, it is these, I think, small places and whatever community you're in, and I mean, I'm so grateful to Paul for the community he's created with Cascadia, that is what's going to save us, is being in community with each other and working together. When Paul told me about the topic of the panel, and of course I had to go back to Gary Snyder because he's kind of the guy that taught me about Cascadia, about place. And I was looking at his wonderful book, The Practice of the Wild. This essay, there's a epigraph from Dogen, the Zen master. When you find your place where you are, practice occurs. And I love this little story he tells, that he was in Montana and he heard a Crow elder say something like, I think if people stay somewhere long enough, even white people, the spirits will begin to speak to them. It's the power of the spirits coming up from the land. The spirits and the old powers aren't lost. They just need people to be around long enough, and the spirits will begin to influence them. For me, even though I grew up in Seattle and spent some summers on Bainbridge Island and was always out in the forests and beaches of the Salish Sea, the Puget Sound, it wasn't until I moved to Walden that I really suddenly understood what it meant to find a home that was both physical, social, and spiritual. So that's really, I guess, where my poetic practice comes from, is being in that place, listening to that place, and then working, socially with the community to try to do whatever we can to protect it. And I guess the other thing I would say about Waldron is, because it's so small, we have a monthly community meeting, which really is grassroots democracy in action. It's where kind of democracy began, is in those schoolhouses and city halls and churches where people gather to make decisions about what they want to happen in their community. I don't know what else I wanted to say. I know Paul wanted me to talk a little bit. I guess the other lucky thing about living part of the year on Waldron, and I lived there full time, but now I'm just there part of the year. My husband and I built a house there in 1994. Is my friend Sam Green came to visit me there in the early 80s, and the next week he and his wife bought property and moved there within a few months. And he runs Brooding Heron Press, which is a beautiful letter press. And it started in an army tent. When they moved there, they put a big army tent and lived in that for 2 years while they were building their house. And I remember helping move the press, this huge letter press, into the army tent. And in fact, that's where my first book was published. I got to help set the type for the chapbook. It was great. So Waldron is not only a beautiful rural place, but it's full of artists and poets, a lot of retired people, but a lot of families. Right now, I should put this word out just for anybody who might have some influences. The one-room school, its population fluctuates a lot, and right now they're down to about 6 or 7 kids. So the younger families are really reaching out to say, hey, you should come to Waldron, join our community, because we want a more vibrant school. And some of the young people are working really hard to kind of get the word out among their social networks to say, this is a wonderful place to live. Kids are everybody's kids. They're so safe. They can go anywhere. There's beautiful beaches and forests, and there's no real dangers. I mean, other than, I guess, falling off the cliff. But it's really a wonderful place to grow up. So if you know any young families that are looking to go back to the land, tell them to check out Waldron. See if they can find a place for themselves there. I guess Paul told me I was supposed to read a poem.
Well, you could.
So I'm going to. I guess because of the kind of lifestyle on Lorin, it makes me think of the Chinese poets. Because people who live there, you know, you're making your life. You know, everybody has a garden. You're in the natural world, and of course, knowing Sam Hamill and a lot of the Northwest poets who've been very influenced by the Chinese, I'm grateful to have been introduced to some amazing old poets. And one of my favorites is Tao Jian, who lived from 365 to 427. He's considered the founder of the fields and gardens tradition in Chinese poetry, and was one of the first to make his natural voice and immediate experience out of that life of living outside the capital. And I think he left government service because he was so discouraged by the politics to take up a reclusive life in his poetry. So anyway, this poem is called To Tao Jian. No pony ride through mountains. I've traveled ragged highways with 16-ton trucks to reach this solitude, where northern mountains rise beyond a gray sea, their empty trails winding to peaks that touch the sky. My rivers run in tides, ridden by gulls, and drift logs swirled past buoys. Though my cabin's not made of rushes, and my metal roof is guaranteed to last 100 years, I too watch the 10,000 things swirl, dance, die, and rise. The peony's red crown holds the rain-soaked soil, rusted stalks still held by spring's green ties.
Our next speaker is Brandon Letsinger. He is an open source advocate, regionalist, movement builder, and Cascadia Now founder, administrator at Regenerate Cascadia, producer of the Cascadia Northwest Arts and Music Festival, and executive director of the Department of Bioregion, and founding director of Cascadia Now. I mean, there's no time to wait. Cascadia Now. Before stepping back in 2017, he's a mover and a shaker and a friend of the land, therefore a friend of humanity.
But before I start, I just want to say a deep gratitude and thank you to Paul and all of the really amazing people who have made this happen. And thank you for inviting me here today. I think as we talk about practice of place and practice of Cascadia, one of the things I'll talk about is just maybe a little bit of also why Cascadia. And that when we have these events that use the term Cascadia, that creating a shared vocabulary and a context of what we mean by Cascadia can also be really important. So with all of that, first I'd like to just start by saying welcome to Cascadia. Welcome to our home place, as defined through our watersheds and rivers, rather than arbitrary nation-state boundaries and borders. And so I think one of the first ways that I'll just talk about Cascadia is really through the geology. And it's the watersheds of the Fraser, the Snake, and the Columbia, all the way out to from the Rockies, and then tracing the drop of water and the path that it takes from where it lands all the way on its journey to the Pacific Ocean. And then all the way to the shore, but actually extending beyond that to the Cascadia subduction zone in the east. And then from the north, from southeast Alaska, Mount St. Elias, all the way down to Cape Mendocino. And I think one of the coolest things about when we start to talk about bioregions, and bioregion just means life place, but one of the coolest things is that it's not just about a line on a map, and it's not just one static thing that just is immutable and it never changes, but rather it's visible from space. And it's many different layers that blend and come together that all give us our shape of what we call Cascadia. And so it's not just about lines on a map, but actually creating these rich tapestries of bioregional atlases of different layers coming together. Cascadia especially is defined through geology. It's the hardest lines. Originally in 1975, Bates McKee, who was a professor who worked at the University of Washington was kind of one of the first to use this term. And he wrote a textbook, a seminal piece of work called Cascadia, the Geologic Evolution of the Pacific Northwest. And it espoused this radical notion called plate tectonic theory. And so because of that, Cascadia still has this really rich tradition rooted in the hardest lines in the geology. And from that is also where one of his really good co-workers, David McCloskey, who worked at Seattle University, would actually come to use this term, Cascadia, as a socio-cultural region. And so because of that, you'll notice that we still use this term Cascadia in many different ways, but one of the strongest is also that we live along the Cascadia subduction zone. And then what's really beautiful is that it's also a recognition that these mountains and peaks and this geology helps give us definition. It helps create our identity. And it also is a recognition that this land is not static, it is not immutable, but it is alive. And I think one of the beautiful things about events like this is about how do we animate and recognize this living region. And I think what's beautiful is then if we talk about stories and we start to walk through what makes a bioregion, starting with the hardest lines and the oldest stories of time, then we start to work our way through to the softer lines and to the ecosystems and then to the people who live here and how that affects our culture. So what's really beautiful is, and as Ken was saying, is that one of our newest old stories is that of the glaciers. And I think that everything from the Salish Sea, glaciers came down and they carved it out. But also they created these massive ice dams, which burst through over and over again, carving out and creating the Columbia River, and flooding and creating alluvial plains, which actually then created the Willamette Valley. And so all of these things together actually help create all of the different systems and patterns for why ideas like Cascadia as a bioregion are so important, and from which these softer patterns kind of draw their life from. And I think what's really fun is that, as Ken was saying, is that people lived here. People remember these stories, more than 1,000 generations from this time. And what's really beautiful is that is that these hard lines help define these softer flows of energy and patterns, and so we can see this through the wind. And we can see this through the precipitation and the soil. And we can see how this impacts then what grows here and what grows where. And then we start to be able to figure out ways that we can kind of adapt to the places that we live. And what's really fun is then we can start to see how that impacts salmon and all of the different things that we might think of as home. And what's really fun is bioregions, there's not just one term for bioregion, it just means life place. So what is the bioregion of a salmon? What's the bioregion of an orca whale? What's the bioregion of a migratory bird? And so in this way, we can see that this is actually an interconnected way of thinking that helps better represent the people and the place and the ecosystems and the inhabitants. And from that, we start to get how people have lived and how this has impacted people since time immemorial. And then from that, we can start to see how this impacts people living here today, who we talk to, how we spend our money, our economy. And then we start to see how this defines where we live, and so in constraints. And so we have things like the Cascadia megaregion, which is this idea where it's 80% of the population of the Pacific Northwest, of the Cascadia bioregion in its entirety, living on 17% of the landmass. And then we start to see how it starts to impact. I heard someone calling out the Mariners earlier, so we start to see how this impacts our culture, our music, our food, our sports, how we come together, our personal interactions. And then we start to see how this impacts our energy. And over and over and over again, we see layer after layer. And so what this all comes to is that the reason why we're talking about Cascadia as a bioregion, the reason why this is important, is because every different issue, whether we are talking about salmon recovery, energy, drought, flooding, or wildfires, these issues are regional, and nature acts on the scale of watersheds, ecoregions, and bioregions. So if we want to talk about any of these things, we need to be thinking in the terms of watersheds, ecoregions, and bioregions. And I think with that, I'll stop there. So thank you.
Thank you for the welcome, Jason and everyone. So I want to, I just want to answer this question of what does it mean to be here? And, that's a question I think I've been working on for a long time, maybe since I was in utero. Right? But I think I've been working on it consciously for maybe 35 years. And that question of what does it mean to be here, for me is very much about what does it mean to be here. It's in my body. It's something about inhabiting this body, this physical body. I think I have to stand up a little here so I can inhabit it a bit better. Yeah, it's about inhabiting this body, this physical body in this place, in this room, on this land, in the sea, and in relation to all the inhabitants, living mountains and forests and people and self. So, when I was a young poet, I lasted about 1 year at University of Victoria. I went there all sort of, full of hope, and I was quite disillusioned when I left. But I realized that at that time there was a kind of a disconnect in me from my body, but I didn't have the language for that. Nowadays I might call it, I was kind of depressed back then, but it just seemed everyone else was having much more fun than I was. And I thought there was maybe something wrong with me. And what I've learned since then is that there was a way that I was not inhabiting my body, and I came to understand why and how to find the resources also within my body to get more present. So I think that question of what does it mean to be in your body has directly led me to, I worked very briefly as a legal secretary. I was very bad at it. Not my side of the brain. And then I took this bold step in my late 20s of moving to Toronto from Vancouver Island, which is my home. I live in Comox, BC, close to the water. And I moved to Toronto and I went to massage school, which, back in those days, that was a pretty radical move for me. I was pretty conservative, and that was a big step. And when I look at the map of my life, from that decision on, I was on track, because it had something to do with the body and how I inhabit the body, and what it means to inhabit a body. So I trained as a registered massage therapist, and then from there I took a psychotherapy training that also was very body oriented. So I've spent many years exploring this body, which is has the same sort of characteristics as other bodies. We have this container, our body is a physical container, our muscles it's a physical container for our emotions, our instincts, our feelings. And if you think about a container, if you think about it as like a bucket, well, a bucket holds water if it's got good solid boundaries, and you can fill it, and you take that same bucket, and if there's a lot of holes in the bucket, then everything spills out, and it makes it very difficult to regulate the emotions, the instincts and feelings that are all circulating in this body. Yeah, I did. I trained a lot with some European therapists, some amazing Danish therapists who were working with the body, and I discovered, that something that really changed my, I guess, my self-esteem about being in the world as a person who is not very sort of hyper and what's the word? I can't even think of it. Yeah, that's me, right? So there you go. The work that really changed me was discovering that, like, I think for the most part, we all know that in response to stress, we can tighten up. We can tighten up our muscles. We hold in. We hold back, and we maybe tighten up our breathing, so we're breathing a little more shallowly. And that's the sort of common knowledge, I think, about, what is stress. So what do? You get a massage, you try to relax, those are the things that address that response to stress. But there's another response that is less well known, and that's a hypo response, which is a response in your muscle system where our bodies are just amazing. You adapt in a way to your environment and to the stress in your environment. Your muscles can adapt by just letting go of the energy, like just letting it go. It just kind of disappears, becomes sort of lifeless. I'm using the example here of arms, right? So you can maybe sense along in your own bodies. If we're tight and holding on, your shoulders retract a little. It just gets a bit tight in there. There's not a lot of room, for the movement of energy, which is emotion. But if we also let go of sensing our arms, for example, then they become kind of dead. They just kind of hang there. So then we move through the world with these dead arms. And it's not a bad thing to have no energy in the arms, but it's when it limits your ability to do certain things like reach out, push away. Right? Our arms are very much connected to those activities. Gather in, and it's a brilliant response. It's an adaptation to your environment. Sometimes the environment that we're born into is nourishing, and sometimes the world is kind of hostile, and there's usually a mix of that. So our bodies have this just amazing capacity to either disappear in some way, or we're still in them walking around, but we've kind of taken our energy somewhere else. That work that the Europeans are doing and are currently doing is just so groundbreaking, because to deal with that kind of stress, it doesn't mean relaxing something. There's already no energy in it. So if you try to relax an arm that's dead, it's not going to work. And so it's more about, first of all, noticing, what part of your body is present and what part is absent. Because we all have different patterns. We all have them. This is a very natural kind of thing. One of the ways that you can check in on that is to even sense, is there a difference between your front side and your back side? Just in terms of, can you sense it? Right? Like it's there, but can you actually sense it? For most people, there's a little difference. I can sense my back more right now, for example. There's a little fluttering going on here on the front side. Right? So just noticing those differences. There may be a right to left side difference, where you're more aware of or have more access to this right side of your body to kind of move through the world and reach out, stop, gather. So you can check in, what is the difference, if there is one, between the right and left side of your body. So I want to talk a little bit, it's a big topic, so I'll just kind of give you that as an introduction, that there is a hyper response we have in our muscles, and there's a hypo response. And they are both just part of our body's natural capacity to respond and adapt to our environments. When I think of emotion, when I think of our body as a container for emotions, the ability to sense your emotions, whether they're the teeny tiny ones or the bigger ones, it's part of your presence. It's part of your presence and being here. I think that emotions are very much like water. They have a kind of a flow that sometimes is very calm, sometimes there's a little ripple, maybe there's a little ripple of sadness in there, or maybe there's something that's bigger, more like white caps. So I think framing our emotions in that way is really helpful. And one of the practices actually that I have in terms of connecting to Cascadia and to the land that I inhabit with this body is to swim in the ocean year-round. I have a wetsuit, with various layers. I have a headband to prevent brain freeze. But this practice of going into the water at any season and being present to, like immediately present when you hit the cold water, boom, your skin is alive, there's more energy in it, and there's a bit of an extreme sport in a way. So there's that sort of fear that you're conquering, and then when you're in the water, you're experiencing all the changes throughout the seasons. The herring spawn tend to get out of the water during that time. I write a bit about that. The crabs on the bottom of the sea, and when you turn your head when you're swimming, you see clouds. You see how, that little glint of sun on the water. And you can kind of feel like a seal, and sometimes the seals track you as you're swimming along, but you don't really know it because they kind of stay behind you or alongside you. Yeah, so that I think, as a practice that connects me to Cascadia, that for me has just been a wonderful discovery. It's not just about the exercise, it's about being in nature, it's about being there with other people, with other swimmers. As we walk into the sea, and there's always that bit of trepidation. It's like, oh man, it's cold today, I don't want to go in there. And you go in and you experience something that immediately shunts the blood from your arms and your legs to your core. And when you come out, you sit around, we have these dry robes that we get changed under, and then we sit on a log, then drink tea. And it's such a reverential experience. So I find it, for me, that's a very spiritual experience. It's like, wow, look where we are. And there's a huge kind of a joy that comes in those moments. So that's my practice of connecting to Cascadia. And I'll just show a couple of slides. So most of these slides are where I swim Comox on Vancouver Island. That's me, the author. So there I am entering the sea. I mean, just look at that. Walking right in. That's my swim pod. And you can see the water's changed here. So, you know, if you walk into the water and we have the saying, we go in grumpy and then we come out joyful. And morning swims are just gorgeous, greeting the world. That's me. I was terrified of swimming when I first started, of the ocean, because it was so alive. Now I love it. And these are some dippers. So they're just in bathing suits and neoprene booties. And this is the same spot at Point Holmes, Comox. So what do we do? This is low tide, so we'll walk down the boat ramp. It's a long walk. And that's why every swim is also very different. The tides are different all the time, so there's different things going on there. Oops, that's my swim kit. Got the safety buoy, that big orange floaty. And this is nearby a place called Goose Spit. It's a natural spit of land in Comox. And I have a poem about that in my chapbook. This is my sweetie pie Ted and my sister, one of my sisters, Carrie, and they're harvesting clams nearby. Ooh, dinner. Ted's an amazing fisherman.
Oh.
And this is the last slide of, sometimes the sea is pretty wild. But, well, I don't need to say anything because you can just get it from the picture. I think that's all. Thank you.
Speaker, Robert Michael Pyle. I think really one of the great raconteurs of all of Cascadia. Among us, things that I think are fairly unique, true of him, but not the rest of us. Subject of a film, The Dark Divide. Lepidopterist. Not only that, but one of international renown. And really our great teacher about our butterfly and moth sisters and brothers. Author of 30 books. That's an impressive run, including some of the really must-read, at this point even canonical texts of us rethinking our shameful heritage of being here. Wintergreen, Sky Time and Gray's River, Where Bigfoot Walks, and in the novel Magdalena Mountain. 5 poetry collections. You can hear him on Spotify with the bassist from Nirvana. That's also something true of Bob, but not true of the rest of us. And his really awesome brand new book, a book that if you disagree that it's awesome, that means you haven't read it yet. It's for sale at the Watershed Press table, Swimming with Snakes. Robert and Michael Pyle, really in a league of his own. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Fred, and all of your volunteers and your people of the lab who put this thing on every year. Thank you. Is Sophia here for Elliott Bay? Thank you, Sophia and John and your colleagues, old friends from many years back, and the greatest supporters of writers and readers in the city over the years, Elliott Bay Books. And how gifted we are to have a Benison, like an independent bookstore like that. This extinction crisis, we've lost so many bookstores, but Elliott Bay is still there, and some others. And others, I'm sure, my fellow panelists, each of you were brilliant, and thank you for that. And all of you for being here, and thanks for having me here. And thanks to Watershed Press, and Adelia, and Dan, and Jason, and your colleagues. Now, a few years ago, I was quite ill, and I did not think actually at one point I'd see another spring. But I was so much older then, and I'm younger than I am now. And that's true. But during that time when I was so ill, I was on my front porch where I often spend time. I live in an old Swedish farmhouse on the Grays River, a tributary of the Columbia River, across which lives my dear colleague Jim Dott, who's co-presenting this afternoon, reading from the sister book to this one, and Anne with Jim, and my girlfriend Florence, a wonderful poet, is over there too. So I cross the river a lot. But on my side of the river, in the little tiny hamlet of Grays River, I live in an old Swedish farm called Swede Park. And I've been there, it's a newer residence for me, only 48 years. So I was on that porch where I am whenever I can be. And that was during that time when I was so ill. And it occurred to me, what if this really were the last day, the last time for me? Because it could have been any day at that point. And this poem came to me from Swimming with Snakes, the new book. If this were the last, then the last sounds would be redwings, ocaree, raven, jay, and gull, plus the whistlebug's bleat from the logging show across the valley, and a single winter's frog. The last sights are the dew on blackberry leaves, hazy cloud parting for pale morning sun, tracery of branches stripped for now of leaves. Last tastes, cinnamon toast, black tea, and tangerine. Last smell, the unbearable freshness of the whole mix. Last company, these flies basking on my white robe. But stay tuned, a tortoiseshell butterfly could appear. Last sensation. But why ask me? Pay attention to your own. Could be your last, too. Thank you. I'm going to read a couple of poems in the interest of time. Save that. But I appreciate that. Applause, that is. Brandon, will you please hand me my water bottle? I live in the rainforest, not an arid place like this. Thank you. Or even Astoria. What do you get here, 35 inches? What do you get in Comox, about 3 inches? What do you get in Astoria? About 80. In Grays River, just across the river, we have 120 minimum. So I have to rehydrate quickly. Or I or desiccate or something. So I would like to urge you to encounter the world as if each encounter might be your last. That's not an original thought at all. But each time we think it, it should be. And I mean that. I mean, celebrate that there will be many more. But take everyone as if it's significant, because every encounter, every sensation is significant. If we are going to ascribe to the bioregional credo that Paul gave us, I'll just pull out the one line, it involves deepening our relationship to place. That's part of it, right? Deepening our relationship to place. And I don't know how you do that without paying great, keen attention to your more than human neighbors and the landscape in which they live. The rocks and the minerals, the plants and the animals, the algae, the lichens, the many kingdoms we now know there are up there, down there. If you don't pay attention, then how can you deepen your relationship to place? I don't see how that can be done. So we should live and love as if it were maybe our last, but that this one will never come again. Our surroundings and our neighbors must never be taken for granted. What does that say? Oh, a few years ago I was asked to take part in a revivifying natural history thing in Bellingham and then down in the Southwest. And there were great naturalists there, Tom Fleischner and Saul Weisberg and lots of others, Sarah Rabkin, a bunch of naturalists got together. How do we bring, it was the time of the kids really starting to disenchant themselves through these things and all the other devices and so on. And stranger danger and everything else. It was when Richard Louv wrote The Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. That's a very, very important book. It's a very real syndrome. And that's well established now. But a number of us, Kim Stafford, myself, Mitch Tomashow, others, and Zwinger, have been writing about children partitioning themselves away through many causes for a long time. So we had this conference, and I was invited and then asked to contribute to the proceedings in the role of a deep naturalist. And I just laughed. I said, come on, there are none. I've known some extraordinary naturalists, like Dennis Paulson of this city, and a few others, that come close. I certainly don't. There's no comparison. Nobody's keeping score. We can't possibly, any one of us, know the diversity of all of nature, which includes all of us and everything about us. Most dangerous idea in the world is that there's some kind of actual line between humans and non-humans. We know this here. And I said, I ain't no deep naturalist. I'm not going to play that role in your book. I just like to pay attention and have fun with plants and animals and so on. Because there aren't any deep naturalists. But you know what? There's no getting there, by the way. There's no getting there any more than there is as a poet. What do you want after the Pulitzer? The Nobel. Bobby Dylan got it, but you didn't. There's no getting there. But each of us can become a better naturalist every single day and night of our lives by getting to know a few of our neighbors and caring about them and paying attention to them and possibly even incorporating them into our writing if it makes sense to do so, as Brenda does so brilliantly, as Alicia inspired us to do. And by goodness, the deep swimming, the wild swimming, I'm in awe of wild swimmers as one who sinks in water. And I do. I sink to the bottom in water. So I'm in awe of wild swimmers. And I love who's the British writer who wrote so wonderfully about wild swimming in Britain? Great natural. Anyway, so a lot of you have talked about the connections I am referring to. But do not forget that. There was a wonderful Colorado writer, I hope many of you know, named Anne Zwinger, writer and artist. Her book, Beyond the Aspen Grove, was the book that let me know that I could write a book like Wintergreen. I could write the kind of book I wanted to write. Later we became dear friends. She's passed now. But Anne wrote a wonderful book called, she was from Colorado Springs, and her mountain cabin where she went to write and immerse herself among her neighbors of flowers and animals and plants and so on, was called Constant Friendship. Isn't that a good name for a mountain retreat? Anne wrote, among many books, a book called The Nearsighted Naturalist, in which she said, learning the names of the plants and their families, their evolutionary relationships to one another, in the most superficial, simple way, opens the world to you, so that you can go anywhere and feel at home, particularly in the temperate world. It gets tougher in the tropics. So she said, it's like going into a room, some big party, and you're nervous and you don't know anybody there. It's like, didn't you all feel that coming in here? Even though you knew you were going to see friends, there's also going to be a bunch of people you don't know and you go, but you come in and you say, oh man, there's Robert, there's Brenda, whatever. And then you're at home. And that's the way it is with knowing some plants and animals. So Anne said it's like going into one of those rooms, and then you say, kind of nervous. And they say, oh, there's Mrs. Maple. And Uncle Mustard and dear old Aunt Anemone. So I felt that when my late wife Tia and I were able to go to China just a couple of years before she died, on a wild China excursion for a small number of naturalists. And it was pretty special. And we were hiking in a deep valley in a remote panda preserve it's open to only 50 people a year. And it was quite a walk in through a wonderful valley, temperate forest. And I didn't know the species, but Tia and I found ourselves in the most magical field of blue flowers. What are they? But looking at it, I could see the shape of the flower was the very same as the corydalus or corydalis, related to the bleeding hearts that we have in our woods, that grew on my own creek at home at Sweet Park. And I said, oh, that's corydalus. It's a blue corydalus, and so it was. So I felt at home there, though it was so exotic. And there were 5 species of maples. I could tell that. I didn't know any of the species. So by learning some basic characteristics of things, as we saw yesterday, didn't we, Brenda, on your wonderful walk with Jeff, and who was our botanist friend with us?
Jim Dimitri.
Jim. And we saw, and Jeff showed us a place where all 7 of the local ferns could be seen. And we saw each of their characteristics. How special that is. And then you're home. Then you are grounded. It sweetens life. It provides succor and companionship and comfort in distressing times, like these. And by the way, do remember, always, every day, this too shall pass.
Oh, thank you.
That's important to tell ourselves. And you know what? Doing this can be really funny too. I was at Florence's house, which is right on Young's Bay in Astoria, and I heard a bald eagle warbling. You know, bald eagles warble. And it's unmistakable sound. Normally in the air, sometimes at a nest or a roost. And it's not rare to have bald eagles flying over Astoria. That's not rare at all. But this one sounded like it was coming from the telephone wire. So I looked up, and here's the bald eagle warbling, but it's a starling. The great Seattle writer who wrote Mozart's Starling, help me with her name right now. Some of you will know her. She's also written wonderfully about crows and so on. Anyway,
Anne Hawk. Anne Hawk.
No. Leander Lynn Haupt. Leander Lynn Haupt, yeah. Anyway, if you read Mozart's Starling, you know that's not unusual that a starling can mimic anything. But here's a bald eagle. I wrote a poem in here about the regal starling. So, and the other thing it does is it makes life constantly interesting. It gets us past our own bloody selves. Now, you're all interesting to an extent. I suppose I am too, but you know what? The rest of the world is much more interesting than any of us is. All the other things. And so our poetry needs to go beyond ourselves if it's not going to become just ingrown and frankly sometimes a little much of a muchness. Well, the subtitle of this book, Swimming with Snakes, and it's poetry and prose, short prose bits, some excerpts, some new, but they're short, is encounters with the actual world. Swimming with Snakes encounters with the actual world, which is the world I'm interested in. And I would like to read you 3 of those very short encounters before concluding. The first one is aphids. And this was when I was working with Chris Novoselic, the Nirvana guy, who's the master of our local grange, and he's a potato farmer, and he's an extraordinarily communitarian man. And we've collaborated on some local politics, and particularly defeating roadside spraying in our county and things like that. Chris is one of the most committed, engaged people I've ever known, and kindest. And yes, as the young say, and yeah. and so, yeah. So the friend in this poem is Chris Novoselic. Aphids. Oh no, I'm sorry. There are 3. Okay. A mantis. We were inspecting the new paint job. What's that bug? Asked my friend. And there on the blank white wall of the porch, as if posing for pictures at the Emmys, her gown the same green as the new trim against the fresh whitewash, a big fat female Mantis religiosa, the European praying mantis. Never seen here before, or even in the county. Now, where did she come from? She's not telling, sitting there on the wall, worshiping in her own chosen way. Here's another little one called Firefly. Many of the poems are longer, but this is the time for short poems. I saw the green light go on in my hands, scuttling in the undergrowth with its lamp left on. It was easy to follow. Plucked up, it poured bioluminescent paint all over my palm, and then flew, flashing, up toward Cassiopeia. But before all that, I held the firefly, and the green light came back into the world. Closing my eyes, I saw it again, against the lids, against the dark. And one last thing, little one of those, and this will be almost my conclusion, is called aphids. Because you know, even the things that people think of as pests are just doing what they're evolved to do, you know this. And sometimes that's inconvenient for us, so, you know, seek the beauty in your adversaries as well. And still treat them mercilessly if they're that one particular mint that's trying to take over my place. It's not their fault. They didn't invite themselves here. And the Lushootseed speakers certainly didn't invite any of us here. And how beautiful to hear you speak in Lushootseed. Thank you so much for that. Aphids. Gray aphids, lined up 3 deep along the stem, suck nasturtium's sap and give back honeydew for their sweet-toothed shepherds, the ants. I nip the tip of nasturtium spur, steal a drop of syrup from the nectary's deep hold. Such sweet and spicy stuffs these orange and yellow blooms give up. But I'll never know the real thing, how the honeydew tastes refined, until, like the greedy ants, I suck it from the sucking bugs themselves. I would like to close by quoting, I have a prophet at each end, Bobby Zimmerman at the front. And I'd like to close with Gary Snyder, of course, who's already been evoked. And in particular, his poem For the Children, which you must all know, and in particular one triplet from it, and you know the one. Gary says, stay together, learn the flowers, go light. Now I want to tell you that Gary still does that. He still does all those things. He still does it. He lived in a healthier way than his confreres. No, he's still doing it. And I know this for a fact because the aforementioned Ann Swinger and I were among a group of writers for the Orion Society. I wrote for Orion for 10 years, a column. And we were invited to an award ceremony for the John Hay Medal for Gary that was given in Nevada City. But then we were invited up to Kitkitizzi, to Gary's house on San Juan Ridge. And we were invited into his zendo to sit, though we weren't all Buddhists. And that was rather special, as you can imagine. But a little later, Ann and I were outside, and it was spring, so it was still green up there. A brief green season in the Sierra there. And there was, in the native turf in front of the cabin, a beautiful little yellow Mariposa lily of a species that neither Ann nor I knew. And we were checking it out, and Gary comes out. He saw that we were having more fun than other people who were just going gaga over his study and things like that. And he sat down with us and he said, Ann, Robert, what are you doing? And we said, well, we're trying to learn this flower, Gary. Will you tell us what it is? And he said, oh, I've forgotten it myself. And we keyed it out together with Gary. So, and that's one of the sweetest moments I can remember with him, but also anyone. I'm really, really old, so I studied with Bates McKee. I took my geology from the guy who founded the use of the word Cascadia in a big way first. Yeah. And so I got to know Gary a long time ago, and I've had some nice experiences, but this was the sweetest with Gary's son, to be on the lawn with the yellow anemones, with Gary taking his own advice. And I'll just repeat it. Stay together, and notice the central position in the triplet of the phrase, learn the flowers. Stay together, learn the flowers, and go light. And my dears, that's all we need to know. Thank you very much.
I think questions are a wonderful, wonderful thing. I know already you had a question for Lorin, so please.
Yes. And this question, I've studied and worked with these body therapies like shiatsu and acupressure and acupuncture. So, and it's Japanese and Chinese origin of the body. So, what do you find with the European people that you study with, and what is the therapy called that you study with?
So what is the name of the body psychotherapy that I studied?
Yes.
It's a European system called Bodynamics was the first one. The second one is relational trauma therapy with a therapist, a Danish therapist named Merete Brandbjerg.
Okay.
So Father in Korea, he was in El Salvador, San Salvador, at UCA, the Jesuit University. He was the one, the whole philosophy department was murdered by the right-wing death squads. And he wrote an interesting essay on Columbus Day, the discovery of the Americas. And he says it was not a discovery, it was a cover-up. And I think it's interesting that we began with a very beautiful and philosophically sharp words of welcome, because it wasn't that the property belonged to party A and then the property belonged to party B. The relationship to the land, relationship to practice, the relationship to our humanity was covered up. The Cherokee philosopher Brian Burkhardt called it the great lamination. You cover over the land so that you can live on it. So that means there's real ways in our own mind that in order to be here to practice the land, we've internalized all kinds of laminations that block. There's things that we have to undo and unlearn, not just things that we have to do and practice. So I'd be curious if each of you would just give a very short reflection, emphasis on short, on your unlearning techniques for us.
Yeah, I think for the sake of brevity, I think it's really interesting. We have 23 million people who call Cascadia home. And I think one of the powerful questions that we all have to ask and find an answer for is, how can we guide people on a pathway of learning, and then as you were saying, unlearning, to get us to healthier habits and ways of living in place. And I think really that's where bioregionalism and bioregioning can really enter and be a powerful tool for really breaking down a lot of the arbitrary boundaries and borders and really helping build these identities that are stemmed from place. And I think, I think that's something that is up to all of us, and what's beautiful is it's through poetry, it's through practice, I think, that can really guide people. So.
Thank you. Mine will sound like a recapitulation, but I hope a little bit new. And that is that to unlearn the terrible habits, much of it will be tutored for us by the ecology. We are in the time of loss. The moths have collapsed in the Willapa Hills where I live, and with them the bats are much reduced and the songbirds. Why did the moths collapse there? I don't really know the proximate causes. We probably know the ultimate causes. But these kinds of losses, called the insect Armageddon and the insect apocalypse is being called, are going on in other groups of animals and plants too. But we cannot document the loss, which enables us then to unlearn the ways that we brought about the loss, unless we know what we're losing, unless we can catalog and recognize. And so one more reason for each of us to become better acquainted with all of our more than human neighbors. Even though it hurts sometimes, as Aldo taught us.
Thank you for this whole morning. It's been so amazing from the beginning. I'm really grateful to be part of this whole conversation. I had no idea what to expect, but I think in terms of my sort of trying to get out of the lamination, I think one of the biggest things that's helped me recently is being around the kids. I mean, it's just amazing to be around a lot of little kids because they know something that I don't, and it's really deep. And I don't know how to talk about it except for saying that. You know, every day, every year, I learn more, and it's not something I can really articulate. Hopefully, it has to do with how I'm growing in the world in many different ways. I can't really pin it down, but I also I have a routine that really helps me. I like to wake up early. I was up this morning at 3 o'clock, and usually I'm up by 5. And I like to start my day by having breakfast with my dog and taking her out. And then I listen to music. She always listens to all the music I listen to. And she just sleeps. And so I listen to music to start my morning. Usually about an hour. If I'm going through a phase where I'm not working on my writing and drawing, I let myself listen to a lot more music. And I've gone through periods of my life of doing different spiritual practices. I was a disciplined meditator for about 10 years, and I got involved in the Indian community. I started doing that for another 10 years. And now I've gone back to Buddhism. And so when I start my day, I like to have the music, and I meditate, and at least an hour these days, and I try to meditate more sometimes. And then I let myself read and get to my writing. luckily I have time to do this. And then I have my day with the kids, which has been amazing. I feel very lucky that after a very hard life, in terms of having things, I have a beautiful home now with my wife, Brenda, and we have a beautiful dog. So I feel very lucky in this moment that the world is so horrifying. But, I've struggled with mental illness my whole life, and I've never been as crazy as people seem to be getting right now. I've never wanted to kill anybody, and these kids really remind me of that. And it's amazing just to be around the kids because they show you that you've had to compromise in many different ways to just get by in this world, and they help you grow out of that a little bit. And just to be around them playing. I spend almost 2 hours just like watching the kids play basketball and kickball, and I have little inside jokes. And one fourth grader is really into being the original Bruno, and I can't be the original Bruno because he's not glitching. He's in fourth grade. He's talking about virtual reality like this. So, it's just amazing what these kids are going through and learning. I could only get little bits and pieces, but just being around this is so encouraging. So thank you so much for this whole weekend.
Yeah, I would echo what you said about working with children. I was a teacher for 40 years, most of it at middle school level, and teaching 6th, 7th, 8th graders about writing, and just being astounded every time what they observe, what they recognized. They were so much closer to reality than I was, and also that responsibility of being a teacher of what am I bringing to them? What is the lesson? They always taught me more than I taught them, I'm sure. But I have to say, in terms of overcoming the lamination, it's through poetry, through reading my contemporary poets, reading ancient Chinese and Japanese poets. The poetry always brings us closer to the essence, I think, of our lives and of the world. So I guess for me, I have to say my education in poetry has been, well, it's an ongoing thing, right? I'm so happy we still have such amazing poets instructing us in this fraught time.
And the only thing that I would add would be, for me, that it's to listen deeply to the natural world, to watch it, to listen, and to listen with your whole body, to feel it in your body, and everything comes from there. Everything you need to know, I think.
Listening to the evocation of what children can still teach us, I'm reminded that maybe I'll repurpose Simone de Beauvoir. No one is born a colonizer. That's also a deep insight into the call of practice. To be born again. Remember who you were born as.